One of the things that came up, maybe we could launch from this because it ties in so much, is
Yeah,
so you came in through the traditional Latin Mass.
I did. I did. So that is my basically, I mean, it's not that I haven't attended Novus Ordo during my time as a Catholic. I certainly have, especially through like, daily mass. And when I was in RCA, they had this was actually my first experience with the Novus Ordo. Was they have something, I believe it's called the rite of acceptance, where they present the catechumens in front of the church, and there's like
Hmm.
a almost a ceremonial acceptance of those people as members of the church, or would be members of the church. And so that was my first experience with Novus Ordo. But other than that, my very first mass was a traditional Latin mass at the very same parish my wife and daughter and I still go today.
Okay. Yeah. And so you were, thanks be to God, initiated in all the traditional rites.
Yes, yes,
Um,
we were. So we received baptism according to the 1952 Rituale Romanum by our late priest, Father Louis Made. May he rest in peace. Um, and he also gave us First Communion, obviously, at the traditional Latin Mass. So that would be done according to the traditional rites as well. I would say confession. So confession was the only one where we received that in the normal rite. And that's the one
mhm.
I think I most regularly receive in the normal rite, because I only know two priests who offer it in the extraordinary form in my area. Um, but after some, I'll tell you about it later. But after some things that happened this week, I think I'm just going to start going to those two priests in particular
Mhm.
regularly and just requesting that they do it, because my bishop is currently maintaining status quo with the Rituale Romanum and the traditional mass in light of the response of the dubia. And it's a bunch of like canon lawyer stuff that's way over my head and pay grade, but
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. I get to go to the traditional Latin Mass on Sundays. That's
oh,
pretty
that's
much,
beautiful.
yeah. So that's for the last year and a half. And it's been a big game changer. I have all these comparisons. I grew up Novus Ordo, um,
Yeah. Yeah,
lukewarm
that's my
Catholic, all that stuff.
godfather and everything. Same thing.
So it's neat. One of the things that's neat because you were raised Pentecostal, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they refer to themselves as non-denominational, but if you take a look at their outward expressed theology, it's very clearly like a Southern Pentecostal, kind of like, I guess, like maybe like Jimmy Swaggart style, sort of Southern Pentecostal Christianity. A
Okay.
lot of like speaking in tongues, quote unquote, like the
Hmm.
babbling and the, somebody is doing the babbling on one side of the church, and then somebody is like shouting in English on the other side of the church, interpreting, if you will,
Okay.
things of that sort. There was no like really sacramental theology at all. Like baptism, I guess, was seen. It was important. I mean, it was they treated it important when you did do it, but it was more like it was a choice you made and it didn't save you, sort of
Hmm.
thing. So yeah, a lot of emphasis on the charismatic gifts and things like that, which I still admire that. I think that there's certainly a place for that in the church, but not I don't believe tongues is that. I think that,
Right.
I think tongues is where you actually understand a language that you don't know, or speak a language that you don't know, or rather you speak, somebody else hears you speaking a language that they speak that you don't speak. If my reading of the Acts of the Apostles is correct, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like Peter must have spoken in Aramaic, but people from 15
Yeah,
different countries heard him in their
in
tongue.
their own language. Yeah, exactly, and understood what he was saying. So that's my understanding of that specific charismatic gift and things like that. I have this book called Saints Who Raised the Dead, about like the various stories of saints who allegedly resurrected the dead. And I think it's very fascinating because it's clearly says in scripture we're going to do that, and
Hmm.
people like St. Patrick did, apparently.
Yeah, that would be a fast. Who's the author of that book?
I will grab that for you sometime today, and I will definitely send that over to you. But it's called
Yeah.
Saints Who Raise the Dead, and it's really good. It was given to us by some really close friends of ours, and they also
Okay.
gifted us a book on Eucharistic miracles, which I think is pretty popular because I've seen it at my church before. And that's a pretty good book too.
Yeah, and one of the I put on Twitter. The reason I asked about the Pentecostal is because I put on Twitter. I'm not sure if you saw it. It got a big reaction. Um,
Oh, I didn't see it.
it was
You
like a
stir
week
up a little
ago.
controversy.
Yeah, it's whenever I mention Satan on Twitter, I tend to get some undesired reactions. I have to
Yeah, I'm
block
one of those
people.
kooky people who believes demons probably just have Twitter accounts and they're masquerading as human beings.
It's funny. Are you familiar with Monsignor Rossetti and the experiences they have of the demons using the cell phone of the possessed person to send harassing text messages to people, including the exorcist?
No, I was not aware of that. I've heard of Monsignor Rossetti before, but I did not know that. That's very interesting, and I don't doubt it whatsoever.
Yeah. So here's this got December 21st. I posted this on Twitter, and maybe if I get this part into the video, I can put this up here somehow. Um, 542 likes, which is a pretty big deal. I don't have
Yeah,
that big of a
that's huge.
presence. 111 retweets. So I put, from new research, I'm beginning to understand that the traditional mass is the antidote to the occult.
I
No
did
wonder,
see this.
no
I
wonder
did.
Satan is suppressing it as the occult skyrockets.
Yeah.
And then, so that was, I think that was really inspired by reading your answers to the questions I had already sent you, because you, some of the key things you said, I'll extract it when I do the research more, was what you were seeking the whole time in the occult. I think
Yeah.
you found when you encountered the traditional Latin Mass, not the Novus Ordo, because and that's the beautiful thing about your story, is that God brought you to the church through the traditional Mass, traditional sacraments,
Yeah.
not the modern rite. And then, like, your occult. So, how long would you say you were in the occult? How many
So
years?
it's a pretty complex answer, but if we just go like a basic, and this is usually how I do it, if we just go from a basic, diabolical obsession where I become interested in the occult and begin reading about it on the internet, to when I become interested in Catholicism and start reading about that on the internet and taking that seriously, my serious practice probably lasted 4 years, like four
Okay.
years, just about.
Yeah. So that's and that was when you were your late teens. I guess you were
Yes.
18, 16, you said, when you started.
Yes.
So you had
16 when
that.
I started reading about it, and then when I started really like taking it seriously and um doing things every day, not just reading about it on the internet and like accumulating information and identifying with philosophies. When I actually started doing things and bringing it into action, I was probably about 18, late 18, early 19,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah, so you had that youthful zeal and
Yeah,
you
all
know
the vigor of my youth pointed in the wrong
yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
I had a lot more energy to put into it then, and I didn't have a daughter, at that time, which I mean, I was still practicing for the first 2 years of her life, but
Mm.
which that's also another interesting story, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, yeah, that would be. So when you right, in one of the answers you gave, you said when you went to your first, I think it was your first mass, the TLM mass, you said
Yes,
you knew, clearly you knew something supernatural was happening on the altar.
yes, absolutely.
And could you describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, when I was doing my own ceremonial magic, my own sorts of like rituals at my home, I actually used incense and makeshift vestments, basically just like
Mm,
a white sheet I had cut a hole in because I didn't have very much money at the time and I wasn't fiscally responsible either. Uh, so,
sorry.
I had these makeshift vestments, and there were quote unquote rubrics that were followed for specific sort of rites that I was performing, like Liber Rush, like I mentioned, and
Mhm.
things like that, these acts of solar worship and avocations and invocations. They were formal actions. They weren't. So some people do these things just kind of on a whim through the use of like Ouija boards and stuff like that, which I did use those tools as well. But the main practice was ceremonial in nature. So there would be the use of incense. And I actually used frankincense and myrrh that I bought from a local witch store, oddly enough.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yeah, they sell that stuff too. Got to be
wow.
careful where you buy your incense from, people. Just saying. Make sure you get it from a Catholic source because monks do source it and make it. So buy it from them, not from your
Yeah.
local witch store.
Yeah.
So I would be doing those things, and I used to chant as well, and there was the use of
Mm,
Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and other languages in these practices. So I was already acclimated to this ceremonial aspect of religion, if you will, little r. The Catholics have the big R religion. Um,
right.
so when I attended the Tridentine Mass, I immediately noticed like they're doing all these things that I'm familiar with, that I already know, and the smell is obviously familiar with the use of frankincense,
Mm,
and the priest is wearing these amazing vestments. He's facing away. He's silently praying in Latin. It was a missa cantata, so not all of it was silent, obviously. A lot of it was very grand, and we were very lucky to have a beautiful choir, which my wife it participates in actually, and helps
Nice.
them, assist them. Not during the ordinary of the mass, but or the proper, or not. I'm sorry, not during the propers of the mass, but during the ordinary and the hymns. Um, and when the consecration came, and he, especially the elevation in particular, I already had a bit of a rudimentary understanding of Catholic liturgy because I had been reading about it, and I had been in a Discord group with people
Right.
who were traditional Catholics, which is that's kind of part of the whole reason, right? Is that I was exposed to this through people who already were invested in tradition prior to my conversion, which was a huge inspiration for that. Obviously, it was done through divine providence because I wouldn't be where I am right now without all of that. And that elevation occurred, and instantly in my head, I'm thinking, this is the center of everything they're doing, is this right here. And I had read about, so I was in the religion of Crowley, not formally because I had never joined any organizations, but I was a solitary practitioner of it. I absorbed a lot of the literature. There are like encyclopedias online, almost like the Catholic encyclopedia, but for,
Yeah.
and I still to this day, I don't speak Greek, and the word thelema is a Greek word. I don't know if it's thelema or thelema because I don't speak Greek, but it's actually the word used in the agony of the garden of
Yeah.
Gethsemane. So when Jesus Christ says, "Thy will be done," in the Greek, the word is thelema for will. So that's where Crowley got it, which is
Hmm.
terrifying. But
Yeah.
but I noticed this, and I was like, this is the center of everything they're doing. And then I noticed all these things that I was familiar with, like the use of vestments and incense and chanting specifically in a dead language, and these tones, and and everybody is doing these postures. The postures in particular, like the bowing and everything during the Gloria and the Credo. And I started to think like, oh my gosh, everything I've been doing is pretty much just like a ripoff of this.
Hmm.
Like it's like a great value version, you know what I mean? Like you go to the frozen food section, there's Tyson chicken and the great value chicken at Walmart. And I was eating the great value chicken, and all along I wanted the Tyson, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Did you get a chance to compare? I'm curious to go to a Novus Ordo in the beginning of discovering the Catholic liturgy and feel or do a real comparison between the two liturgies?
Not in a comprehensive way that would
Mhm.
satisfy any sort of academic curiosity, I think. But I did attend the first half of the mass during that rite of acceptance because we didn't stay for the Mass of the Faithful for that portion. But the thing, and obviously it's not practiced like this everywhere. You have what they call unicorn masses, which I believe actually my new parish priest practices the Novus Ordo this way with the Ad Orientem, the smells and bells. And
Mhm.
in retrospect, I think if I would have ended up at one of those, I probably would have had the same effect on me. And I wouldn't have come to realize the differences until later, kind of like I did. Because I still, at this time, I knew that God wanted me at traditional mass because that's where I was exposed to the church. So that was kind of my conviction at the time, is that's why I attend this, because I know God wants me here. I don't really know the extreme differences. I was listening to a lot of homilies on Sensus Fidelium's
Mhm.
page. That was really actually like, shout out to, I think his name is Steve. I can't remember, but shout out to him because you changed my family's life, man. You and Dr. Taylor Marshall changed my family's life. Thank you for what you do. Seriously, you're saving souls. It's not a joke.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Steve, I've gotten to, by divine providence, I've gotten to know him. We live in the same area, go to the same parish. And it was when I was
oh
doing
wow.
research for Slaying Dragons, I discovered Father Ripperger's teachings through Sensus Fidelium's channel.
Yes.
So when I got to meet him, I'm like, wow, this is, how providential. And then like that's great that we can share this with him because it's um the real sometimes you don't know the effects of the good things you do, the good things God does through you. But when you hear these stories, like he'll be thrilled to know that he helped bring, and you're just like one. If it had a big impact on you, bringing you out of the occult, it probably did the same thing for 1,000 other people.
Oh yeah, certainly. And I've heard people on Twitter and everything say like this page is one of the greatest gifts. Every Sunday, while I'm in the shower preparing for mass, I listen to the new video, like the next homily he posts, or it is an amazing, comprehensive
Mhm.
source of catechesis. It is underrated, Honestly, it's very underrated. And like you said, the Father Ruperger's lectures on there specifically, and I actually have been thumbing through your book. I've made it, I think, about halfway through chapter 1. I've had a bit of a busy week.
Oh yeah.
um, I'm hoping to finish it within the next week or two here. But you mentioned Father Ruperger's lectures on spiritual warfare. And in the
Hmm.
beginning, during that period between like my first mass and my baptism, those lectures had a significant impact on what I was learning about my past life, essentially. Like how it actually works, not how I thought it worked while I was doing it, but the actual machinations behind everything, and why I was feeling the way I was feeling, why I was having certain issues in my life. And
Oh.
like it became clear to me, like, oh, like this was the source of a lot of insanity in my life and in my youth.
Yeah. So that's an interesting little point. So that was right when you said at what point did you start listening to Father's videos?
So basically, I mean, pretty close to after our first mass. I don't remember if it was
Okay.
me or my wife who first discovered Steve's YouTube page, but
Okay.
or it may have been even given to me on that Discord. Oh, it's been a long time. I really wish I would have wrote all this down when I was going through it, which I
Yes,
was
right.
told to do, but I ignored some people's advice. I still remember quite a bit of it because I have a pretty good memory, but I can't remember which one of us discovered his page, but one of us discovered his page through some means, either through accident in the, related video section, or somebody sent it to us. And we just started listening to his stuff. And then we found, I think it was that one where Father Ruperger is talking about a massive gorilla beating the crap out of the demon, and the gorilla's name is Christ, and
Oh,
which is like a huge meme actually in triad circles. But it's awesome. It's an awesome description, and it was that lecture, and I think it's an hour and a half long, and he's sitting at a
mhm,
podium. I don't know if he's
right.
giving a homily or what he's doing precisely, but I listened to that and was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. It was very
Yeah.
clear he was well educated.
Yeah, and I have eventually I still haven't done it. I have my website, theslayingdragonsbook.com. I have some tabs at the top, and I've been wanting to take all of the videos that I watched to Father Ripperger and the other priests and just link them all there. Now I have a YouTube, so I want to put them on, make a playlist on my YouTube so people can find these more easily, because it's like they're all referenced in the back of my book, but it's
Yeah.
easier if it's
Yeah, if
clickable.
it's all compiled in one place.
But I had two questions. Um, when you Was there an overlap when you were starting to lean towards Catholicism? Were you still practicing the occult? And was there a time when you were kind of Catholic and the occult? Like
No,
this?
not necessarily. So that's a very interesting question. I would say no in terms of physical practice. In terms of attachment, like emotional attachment, that certainly did exist. And I think that's the hardest thing to shake, is this
Yeah.
attachment to it, because you do it for so long and it's very convincing, because as I said in my answers, you have this seemingly tangible evidence of the preternatural and supernatural existing in front of you. Like things occur that are unexplainable, that, or at least that I felt like I couldn't explain. And to me, that was a very strong feeling. Even after attending mass, that was a strong feeling, like what was going. And I think that's
Mm,
why I ended up, consuming a lot of Father Ruperger's stuff, is because that gave me these explanations in order to remove these attachments from that. Like, okay, like, yes, the preternatural does exist and I did have evidence of it, but it wasn't the right evidence. It's
mm.
dangerous. It's like, it's like playing around with a loaded gun and being like, yeah, I have evidence that death exists in my hand.
Yeah, yeah.
Just, it's the best way I can think of it.
That's a good image. Um, yeah. So when you were watching these videos and he was clarifying essentially all of your experiences, was there a time when you felt uh, fearful of what you had been,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
because like the veil was being pulled back? You're like, oh, what am I involved in here?
Yes, yes, I became very concerned pretty quickly after starting RCIA. And I actually brought it up to our RCIA director, and some of the priests in our area, a handful of them, like one or two, actually, I don't know in what capacity they work with the bishop and the diocesan exorcist, but I know that they are involved in something called deliverance ministry.
Okay.
And so they put us in touch. So our parish priest at that time, Um, he wasn't the one who celebrated the TLM, but the TLM that we attended was said at his parish. And so he was kind of the go-to guy, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So he put us in touch with another priest in the area. Thank you, Father Roy, for what you did for me and my family, by the way, if you ever see this. Um, and we went there and spoke with him, and he had us run through some of these deliverance prayers with him together.
Hmm.
And it was it was as if like this weight was lifted off my shoulders, honestly. Like we said these prayers against like generational spirits and spirits of the occult, and he kind of ran through like a preliminary examination, if you will, almost like a doctor would, and gathered specific names of entities we contacted, things like that. Like he wanted to know specifics, and obviously it's almost like a general trying to get intel from a forward operating group, trying to get a battle plan together, a larger battle plan for a frontal assault. And then he performed the frontal assault. Yeah.
That's right.
And
There you go. Yeah. So, and that was with your wife was with you?
yes, she was
Okay.
with us, and we went through these prayers together. And he was very careful to say, like, make sure you say every word correctly, pronounce it correctly. If you mess it up, start again. Like, start from where you were last correct and continue. Like,
Okay.
don't stop. Like, things like that. And it was odd because like one of the impressionable experiences I had during that meeting is we did something which I believe is in Father Ripperger's deliverance prayers for the laity book, where it's an invocation of the court of heaven. And
Mm.
I remember seeing in my head clouds opening up, and almost like angelic beings, like these bright, it was in my mind. I didn't see it with my eyes, obviously, so in my mind's eye, if you will.
Hmm.
And I see these bright angelic like beings with swords bursting out of the sky, and darkness being driven away. And I felt lighter. Like I felt lighter, like weight was
Yeah.
lifted off of me. And for the generational spirit prayers, he had us like do these actions where we were removing like nooses from our necks and chains from our legs. And it was as if I don't know if it was a placebo effect or what it was, but it was as if I could feel that happening. Like I was walking lighter. And I left the church thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like a new man. This is
Hmm.
such an insane experience. I don't know how to explain it, you know?
Yeah. And everything you said, it makes sense. It resonates with the things that I put in the book, Slaying Dragons, that exorcists talk about. This literally oppressive feeling when there's a diabolical attachment to a home or to a person, and when it's lifted, there's a lightness that comes.
Yeah.
And even like what you were describing, because certain possessed people will have, I'm not sure if they're what the exorcist would say. Is it a vision? Is it what you were saying, like in their mind's eye, they're seeing this happen when
Yeah.
Our Lady or an angel comes and helps do the carry out or bring about the definitive deliverance from the demon. So there are these little visions. And then I don't know if it was in the video that you watched that I did the podcast. I don't know if I mentioned that on Taylor Marshall's podcast, but right after I learned about all the sacramentals, I have a question for you, if I can remember, about
Yeah.
sacramentals. Right after I discovered all of those, I had the priest come over and I had him bless everything. I started using, blessed salt, blessed candles, blessed oil, because you can consume blessed salt and blessed oil and holy
Yeah.
water too. So I started doing that. So like 5 days, I was devoutly consuming all these things and remembering what the blessings said. And that's the key with sacramentals, using it with devotion. And then our Lord, just to make the story real short, our Lord gave me this gift after I went to confession like a week later. And the gift is very similar to what you were describing. This, um, for me, it was a grace of spiritual warfare where I was able to see the devil's attack plan, his battle plan against me.
Oh,
It
wow.
see, I don't know how to describe, but I was able to see it and be inspired to fight back. And after 3 weeks of this odd spiritual warfare battle I was in, whatever demon this was, I really think it was a demon that probably haunted me since my depression when I was in late high school, early college, and all the stuff I got into then. I think it was just a tag along, as I like to say. But whatever that spirit was, that demon was driven away after about 3 weeks, and I experienced this levity, this lightness, this clarity, this
Yeah.
peacefulness and calmness in my spiritual life. And it sounds very much like what you say, so I totally believe you. And people who embrace spiritual warfare, learn what it's all about, they get it, they see it happening. And that's one of that's why it's so practical to know all this, to know how the spiritual warfare works. But
Yeah.
on sacramentals, this is a question I've been wanting to ask. because someone at a talk I gave recently, somebody came up and was asking a follow-up question and said, she said she has a friend who's into witchcraft. And like,
Yeah,
what can what can she do? And at the end of this talk, I was just a little bit, my mind was kind of spent. I'm like, well,
I have an
yeah,
answer for her if you don't.
yeah. So what I mentioned, yeah. So I'll get your answer. So I eventually just kind of stumbled over myself and came to the idea of suggesting to her to try to work into a conversation the gift of a sacramental to her friend, like the miraculous metal, some holy water,
Oh
blessed
yeah.
candles. And then, so I wanted to ask, so yeah, I would love to hear your answer. And then maybe I'll wait to see what you say, and then I'll have my follow-up question.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And everything you just brought up are all great things to do. I don't think there's, when it comes to using sacramentals for stuff like this, because like I mentioned in my answers, a lot of people who are into Wicca, so a lot of people weren't doing what I was doing, right? Like I knew I was working with demons and I knew it was dangerous. I didn't believe in heaven or hell or anything. So it was a kind of different cosmology I was working with. But a lot of
Hmm.
these people in Wicca, they don't believe that they're doing anything wrong, right? They believe that they're,
Yeah.
oh, I'm in harmony with nature, and I'm doing this like pre-Christian, pagan, more naturalistic, sort of seasonal worship, I guess, is the way, like they see themselves as recognizing the harmony in nature, and they think they have their own sort of like divine image and things like that that the earth gives them. At
Hmm.
least this was my own experience with Wiccans and things like that. So like, and this goes for New Agers too, because New Age and Wicca are kind of pretty much interlocked as of right now in our day and age. It's not like in Gerald Gardner's time where Wiccans were like naked in the woods and stuff like that. There are groups that do stuff like that. It's just not nearly as common as it was in the beginning. There's more of an intersection between like, and you mentioned this on Dr. Taylor Marshall's podcast as well, about like these shops, like these crystal
Hmm.
shops, and they sell these books and stuff. Like it's New Age, but there's like a Wiccan flavor. It's
Yeah.
like, like I have this strawberry watermelon flavored seltzer water. It's like Wiccan flavored New Age, basically, if you will. And I think the best thing to do for people like that who may not recognize or know what they're doing is bad and dangerous is get a whole bunch of cheapo Saint Benedict medals and get them blessed by a traditional priest or somebody who's willing to give you the traditional blessings if it's accessible. If it's not accessible, just get them blessed. Okay. Do what you can. But and we can go into this either in this conversation or another one, because I'm sure it's something you want to get to. But the demons do not like the traditional blessings. So get those done. And when you go over to her house, if you do this, at least, leave them under pillows, leave them under couch, just, slyly slip them under couch cushions, on windowsills and things like that, door frames. Or if you have this person over for dinner, have your exercise salt and your holy water and your oil, use that in your cooking
Hmm.
and feed them that food, because the demon really won't like that. Um, yeah, I would do things like that and pray the rosary every day. And when you pray the rosary every day, ask Our Lady to intercede for that person and to move their heart and mind towards conversion. And one of the promises of the rosary that Our Lady gives us is that everything we ask of her in that will be granted. So that is the best thing you can do, is pray the rosary. So use the sacramentals, but most especially pray the rosary.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would you think, like someone who's involved in, I don't know if it'd be Wicca or witchcraft, would have an altar and have like stones and medallions and
Ooh,
crystals? Would they take, what do you think someone would do if you say, here, did you explain the story of the miraculous medal, why it's called the miraculous medal, the Jewish convert who uh,
yeah.
accepted the bed of his friend and took it and was miraculously converted. Do you think somebody would accept a miraculous medal, for example, and put it on their altar? And is this a bad way
Possibly.
to use a sacramental? I'm wondering.
I don't think so. I mean, when our Lord died, the first thing he did was descended to the upper portion of hell, to the limbo of the fathers, and freed those souls. So if he, if
Hmm.
he went there to free those souls from a bad place, well, it's not as bad as Gehenna, obviously, but it's not heaven, so it's certainly not a good place. I would say that it's probably safe. I mean, it's not like the metal itself is going to become cursed after it's been blessed, because it's
Hmm.
impossible. Or unless you profane it, or the person who blessed it profaned it. I don't really know how that works. I would assume you'd be able to do something to it. that would, I don't know if it would actually nullify the blessing or just lessen your cooperation with it. That's something that makes me question. But no, I don't think it would be a bad practice to, if they accepted it, especially of their own volition. Now that's a big thing. If they do that, that's a very good sign. And if they place it on that table, well, you're basically putting Our Lady in the middle where all these demons are, and they're not going to like that. They're going to flee.
That's
They're
funny.
going to run away. That if there's one thing the exorcists are consistent on, it's that the demons hate Our Lady more than they hate any other human being. They hate her. And so if she's there, they're going to run away. They cannot help it. They do not want anything to do with her. Not only do they hate her, they cannot stand her presence.
Yeah. Did you see in any of your practices or sense in the framework or structure of the occult this kind of diabolical, attempt to frustrate any kind of proximity of the person to Our Lady, almost like creating a void where you would not even think, you'd be kind of resistant to Our Lady in particular?
Yeah, definitely. So in my own experience, I'll use that first. There in Wicca, that was one of my like first big like ceremonial magic sort of experiences, was in Wicca for about like 6 to 9 months probably. But I was, dating a girl whose family who, they took up really seriously. Like, they put on all the bonfires for the various rituals throughout the seasonal year and everything like that. They were the ones who, they had all these people collectively come to the house with like mead and things like that. And not that mead is bad or anything like that, but
somebody give me a
like,
bottle for Christmas.
Oh yeah, that stuff is amazing. We were just drinking some the other day in the parking lot of the church with a close friend. But let's see here. So I would say that in that respect, they have this thing that they call like the divine feminine, or they call it the goddess, right? In Wicca, there's the horned god and the goddess, and there's various different pantheons that Wiccans are free to utilize in that sort of respect. But the constant, right, is the divine feminine, where they worship basically the I don't really know how to say this without being inappropriate, but basically like the sexual nature of woman, where she is fertile, right? She's the giver of life. She births, she carries in her womb. There's obvious parallels to Our Lady there, right? And then in Thelema, we had something called the Great Whore of Babylon, which is similar, but a far more sexually perverse and liberated version of this divine feminine. Obviously, with the image of the whore, I mean, it's very what's the word, coarse, straightforward, and brash, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, they not only do they have these parallels, but these parallels are, and this is something I'm sure that you probably go into in your book, I'm not sure yet, but it's something you're probably aware of. In retrospect, I notice that it's an inversion, which is something that these demons really like to do. They like to take things that are holy and flip them upside down and turn them into the opposite of what they are, in a mockery of God and a mockery of the church in particular. So that's kind of my interpretation of how they do it, right? So rather than just straight up attacking Our Lady, because I've met Wiccans and stuff who are like, oh yeah, the Virgin Mary, she's beautiful. She's like, they see her as this icon of the divine feminine. It's almost like a Gnostic interpretation of her. And at least a lot of the times. Other times you do straight up run into people who are like, who call her a liar and a whore and all these horrible, terrible things that you should never say about the Mother of God. And I think that the best way the demons do it, the most effective way, I suppose, is the proper terminology, is through subversion. So they take this image of Our Lady, they give it another name, and they flip it upside down, and they use that to mock her. And that's how they acclimate you towards an aversion from Our Lady, is you have this perverted and distorted image of her place in reality. So us Catholics have a strong understanding of Mary. We give her a hyperdulia. We give her the highest veneration of all the saints, because she was the living tabernacle. She was the one who bore God himself incarnate in the flesh. Whereas the occultist would merely see that as, oh, well, she's a that incarnation and that living tabernacle thing for them is merely just a esoteric symbol of woman's sexual nature and its sacredness. And so there's this whole, and there's a parallel with the sexual liberation of like the 60s and the
Mm.
world we live in today. Like there's we'll go into that later as well as to how that all ties in. But I think that's the strongest, most effective way the demons do this is they take Our Lady, and rather than making uh you know what she is the center, they distort that ever so slightly. And a good analogy, I think, is something I was given in confession one day, where a priest said to me, if I put a drop of poison in a gallon of water and said 99.9 et cetera percent of this water is perfectly clean and good for you, but just a little bit of it is poison and could kill you, would you drink that water? And that's precisely what these demons are doing. They don't have to do the really like bold and brash stuff that they do at the higher levels of some of these satanic organizations. They can just put a drop of poison and
Mm.
barely distort it, and that's all that's needed. That's it. That's how fragile salvation really is. It's like an egg.
Mhm.
One crack in the egg and it starts leaking out.
Yeah, and the way you were talking about inversion, I've heard that from other former occultists, that's the key of the diabolical, is inverting everything, even in like different magic and witchcraft rituals. Like the technique is an inversion of what you might expect. So it's
Yeah.
messing with psychological warfare is a big part of how the occult works. So two things that just came up, like the way Protestants have been brainwashed essentially against Our Lady, among other things,
Yeah.
is, you could say, clearly diabolical. They've
Oh
been
yeah.
lied to, so they've been presented with a false version of Our Lady, such that it's easy to tear down, and then now they're brainwashed against her. And for
Yeah.
a Protestant to accept Our Lady is heroic, is miraculous almost.
Oh, most definitely. And I know Protestants who, it took some, with my wife, she has a very close relationship with Our Lady. Like, I mean, I pray the rosary every day and I try my best, but her relationship with Our Lady is like, I mean, Our Lady of Fatima, that apparition is really what brought her to the church ultimately. Like
Uh,
our stories are intertwined, but she has her own is very personal individual experience that I never had,
mhm.
and wasn't really a part of in some respects. And Our Lady of Fatima, that apparition really brought her to the church, and she fell in love with Our Lady. And she read this book by Tim Staples, and I think it's a very good book. It's called Behold Your Mother. And it's basically a refutation using scripture alone of all these
Mm.
Protestant obstacles to accepting Our Lady as the Blessed Mother, as the Mother of God, as the Theotokos, as they call her in the East. And I think that that's a very, very good book. I think if you can get a Protestant to read that book, not only is that a miracle, but
That's right.
they will be convinced by the end of it if they read it with an open-minded heart. They absolutely will be convinced of it. And other than the robbery of Protestants of the liturgy and the other, practices of the church closely tied with it, like the divine office and, the calendar, the rogation days, the ember days, things like that. Like, other than the robbery of the liturgy, I think the robbery of our Blessed Mother is the absolute most tragic result
Mhm.
of the Reformation period. And even the reformers, the vast majority of them, they venerated Our Lady. So, I
Right.
mean, wow, they probably never expected people to go so far as to blaspheme Our Lady, but they do. And it's their fault, unfortunately. And, I think it's the biggest tragedy other than the loss of the Holy Mass.
Mhm. Yeah, and we see in the writings of the saints and the experience of exorcists that Our Lady is so powerful, so necessary for us to draw close to Christ. I mean, Christ came
Yeah.
to us through her, and we need to go back to him through her as well. She's our mother by divine command. And we see the power of invoking her in the spiritual life in general, and the ministry of exorcists. Um, yeah, so to steal her away is, I mean, if the demons can get Our Lady out of our lives, then they can
Oh yeah,
operate
there's
much more freely.
one less obstacle, the biggest obstacle really, other than the sacraments. That they get rid of that obstacle, I think they can knock the other walls down for sure. 100%. You know?
Then on inversion, so the conversation, like, I think you're experiencing it too. There's all these things we want to talk about. So I'm trying to write down some of them, but
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
now
I have
that
a I have a terrible habit of being like a ball in a box that somebody's shaking around.
and I think when it comes to why this is so practical for people to know, and people see this and read whatever book God allows me to write around this, like it's practical. It answers a lot of questions, it answers a lot of curiosities, brings clarity. So there's one thing when it comes to the inversions. I'm pretty sure this isn't the question. Just about the proliferation of occult symbols in the
Oh
culture.
yeah.
So we're all like a lot of us, like you and other former occultists exempted, and people like myself that God leads to study this, like most other people are just kind of immune to it now because it's everywhere. Like halftime shows for the Super Bowl, which I think is, I always
Yeah.
avoid anyway, are often occult.
That stuff is scary.
Music award shows, whenever you see these Hollywood idols like performing, they're often, not all the time, but often these occult symbols. But it goes even further. Like someone recently pointed out to me these different potato chips. I can't remember what they're called, but they have like voodoo dolls. I think it's called voodoo chips.
Oh yeah, voodoo chips. I've had those before. Those are actually delicious, which is such a tragedy.
I know that you have to peel away these occult symbols to get to it.
Yeah.
And then, but I recently noticed, now that I'm kind of clued in, I saw a beer glass recently, and I looked at it and I noticed occult symbols all over it.
Yeah.
And I've noticed,
Yes.
satanic beer, these diabolical things with beer. It seems to be a popular thing to do. But when I saw it, I'm like, wait a second. Like, it was called Left Hand Brewery. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah. So
oh my
that's on
God.
my left hand right there.
So yeah, so there's the right hand path and the left hand path. And
Yeah.
the left hand path, correct me if I'm wrong, is the more diabolical, the more
Yeah.
magic
So
one.
in terms of like comparative religious philosophy, I guess they have these categories they place separate religions in, where the right hand path would be considered conventional religion, right? So like Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism and things like that. And then you have like and when I say Buddhism and Hinduism, I don't mean the way we experience it in the West, but the way they do it in the East with the temples, and there's, a liturgy and calendars and all sorts of different things, like very similar to what we experience in the Catholic Church, except totally disordered. And then the left hand path would be pretty much chaos. So like it would be, the left hand path would be Wicca, the occult in general. So Luciferianism, Freemasonry could be arguably considered part of the left hand path, or I would say it's more syncretic, where there's like a amalgamation, like this mixture, if you will, of both right hand path and left hand path doctrines, which is more insidious in my opinion because it can fool even devout people. But yeah, the left hand path would usually be like black magic and things like that. So if you're just speaking in terms of only the occult, the way occultists use right hand path and left hand path, as right hand path would be like Wicca and like these witches
Yeah.
who think they're just doing, white magic versus black magic or whatever. So like I mentioned in my answers, folk magic, that would be right
Mhm.
hand path. Whereas what I was doing, where I'm like summoning demons and stuff, would be considered left hand path. So like it just really depends on who you talk to about that. But yeah, if you see left hand brewery, I go to breweries and things like that, and I can tell you, like, a lot of the people who frequent these places, unfortunately, are worldly and fleshly
Mhm.
folks. And if you see something called left hand, I would, even without the occult symbols, I would immediately, this is probably just me having psychological damage or something, but but I would immediately have skepticism, like, I don't like that. I don't like that terminology that they're using, especially in light of the overarching culture that we're living in. I call it
Mhm.
Neo Babylon, but
Yeah. I have yet to look up this company. I want to. I will eventually. But when I took a picture of the mug, but then I looked at it. So Left Hand Brewery popped out immediately. And wait a second, that's what these former occultists have been talking about. But in the center of it is a skull with a really tall forehead, very tall forehead, and on the forehead is written "Wake Up Dead." And then
ooh,
off to the right and left of the skull, there's all these wavy lines. And when you look at it, you just see wavy lines, a couple creepy faces. But when you stare at it, you see diabolical looking faces, skulls, and then you start to see more like these nude images, like
ooh,
suggestive nude images are clearly, once you see it, clearly in these squiggly lines. Like this is, and now are people just oblivious to this, or are we so just programmed to think, oh,
That's a good question.
it's kind of like the Halloween debate. Like there's a Catholic Halloween and there's a diabolical modern day Halloween, and there's the crossover. So we're so used to seeing skulls, having a skull on your desk is something great saints have done, but having a
Yeah.
demented looking skull, or where you're celebrating death instead of
Yeah.
preparing for death. So it's like a thin line that seems to separate, which goes back to you being conditioned by ritual, and then you see the traditional Latin mass, like, wow, that's real ritual. This is supernatural. This is so much better. This is what I've been looking for. So
Yeah.
there's this thin line. I think God allows it because it's the devil's a liar. So he perverts, he inverts the truth. He presents it back to us twisted, and we think, oh, this is kind of what I wanted. And Halloween's a great time to have that debate.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But
I'm a
it's
big I'm a big Halloween. I grew up like, watching horror movies and stuff like that. And I still I can go into that later. I still have a love for that genre in some ways, but
mhm.
I would say it's very dangerous probably for most people. And there are certain things I just avoid entirely. Like movies so there's a new movie. It's not like new. It came out a couple years ago. It's called Hereditary by Ari Aster, and they actually used the name of a real demon as the central antagonist of the film, and real occult symbols from the same grimoires and books I was using. And so, like,
Oh,
I saw clips of this on YouTube and was like, I will never watch that movie. It's probably super scary. And, like, there's a place for that, I think, because I think that in the culture we live in the past, people in the Christian West lived where death was constant,
mhm.
and it was something very close to them. And in our world, I think we're very disconnected from it. So I think they're properly ordered. I think that there is a place for the horror genre as long as it's not straight up blasphemous or even like subtly blasphemous in any way. You know what I mean? Which is pretty rare, I would say. It's usually like the old school stuff that isn't so terrible. I think for some people, there's a place for that, right? Where they need to be kind of exposed to that which they never pay attention to. Like they need to be afraid of death, right? Because death
Mhm.
is the wages of sin is death, and death is the gateway to, that's one of the last four things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. So it's something we should, I think it should be thrown in our face a little bit more. Obviously, the priests could just do that in their homilies, but
Right.
unfortunately, in a lot of places, they're not.
Mhm.
So I think that there is a place for the symbology, but the unfortunate reality is that the people who are in charge of disseminating these symbols to the public are not on our side. And that's kind of where my point, like where my fear kind of comes in and where my disconnect with that. I don't watch them so much anymore. Sometimes I'll revisit certain things like, what's a good example? I would say like The Shining, I guess, is probably my favorite horror movie. And
Oh.
I think that's because it's very clear that the spirits are evil. They're evil and
Mm.
murderous, and they're the source of the discontent occurring. So I think that there's like and the other thing is catechesis. If you're not well catechized, you can't, and you don't have a properly formed conscience, you can't actually like interpret these symbols correctly. And that's the big issue with this stuff, right? Is so like this stuff is everywhere. The symbols are everywhere. And
Mhm.
this is, I'm now expanding on this. Like it's not just in horror films, it's on beer bottles. It's on, and what you said, I want to note on this before I continue this point, not to interject, but
That's right.
um when you said the nudity, like the subtle nudity with the symbols of death mixed in, that is so insidious. Okay. Like that is the kind of stuff that programs people like Jeffrey Dahmer to do the stuff they do, coupled with obviously like psychological trauma and other sorts of, psychological factors and diabolical factors as well. But like this intersection of symbols of death and sex is so evil, like so disordered and so depraved that no healthy society would ever tolerate it, would never tolerate it. And it's a sign, it's a symptom of just how malignant the cancer of society really is today. Like this stuff is everywhere. These symbols are all over the place. These promiscuous celebrities putting these, they have that song, what is it, WAP? I'm not going to say what it
Oh
means,
yeah.
but yeah, like that was like the number one song. What was it, last year, the year before, whenever it came out? Like 20 years ago, that would have never happened. That never would have happened. If there would have been moms and dads protesting outside of the studios and stuff. But now everybody's just like, oh yeah, that's just the world. Like it's what I think it is just to get to the point. is, so there is a gentleman, he was a KGB defector to Canada. His name was Yuri Bezmenov. And in the 80s, he gave a series of talks about subversion, that the USSR was, that they had, not just was, but they had placed people in specific power positions in education, in media, in politics in the West, including in the United States, and that they were doing subversive tactics to demoralize the countries against their core values. And I think that's precisely what the demons do, is they demoralize. So they deconstruct the moral values, not only of society, but of individuals. And that's what this whole symbological warfare aspect is about. It's about desensitizing, because if you can desensitize people to evil, you can demoralize them. So a lot of it is just through bombardment and constant exposure. So people become desensitized to it. They just, oh well, it's just everywhere. It's just it's a fad or whatever. A lot of people write it off like that, like, oh, it'll go away and stuff like that. But if you look at the evidence, it's increasing. Its frequency is increasing. It's getting more common. And I've even noticed this over the last 5-6 years of my life, that I knew this even as an occultist, that it was everywhere, that it was all over the place, everywhere you look. And another thing which I mentioned to you is that we know from psychology and studies of the human brain that you don't have to be paying attention or even be aware of something to be affected by it. Psychologically, specifically, we can get into the spiritual aspect, but honestly, I'm probably not really all too qualified to touch on that. But I can touch a little bit, at least on the psychological aspect, that we know subliminal messaging works to some extent, that it has an effect on the human brain. So when you're being bombarded with these symbols, and, you know, with scantily clad women, and, you know, symbols of death, and then, like, you know, like there was this Madonna performance, if I don't remember what year it was, where she was saying a few years ago in a performance, I think it was, the line in the song was, not everybody's going to the future, or something like that. And on the sides are people dressed like nuns on this like dark red and black staircase. And it was just very unnerving to watch. And, you know, in light of all that stuff, like, people are being bombarded with this. And what's happening is they're like, oh, well, it's just normal, right? It's just normal. And it's funny because Yuri Bezmenov says the final stage of the subversion method is normalization. So it's demoralization. I don't remember what the second stage is. Forgive me. The third stage is crisis. And the fourth stage is normalization. So right now we're in between crisis and normalization right now, in the world in particular, also in the church, but in the world. And that's what I think is happening, right? Is they're normalizing it, because I think the ultimate goal is a global recognition of what these people are doing in the dark. They don't want to be in the dark. They're in the dark precisely because there's a reason secret societies existed all through the church's history. You know, there's a reason, like, Rosicrucians and Freemasons and stuff had to hide their symbols behind, you know, Christian themes and elements, because they can't come out in the open and say what they're saying when there are Catholic monarchs who have temporal power, and the Pope actually has a military and, you know, and secret police through the office of the Inquisition that they can send out and catch you, you know, and punish you for it. Like, they had to hide, they had to, and now they don't. And now there's still the lingering afterglow of Christendom. So that's their main fear. So if they can just continue to dim that afterglow into this new dark age, they can come out into the open and say, so this is what we do, this is what we believe. And these are intelligent people. These are people who go to Ivy League schools. These are people who write books, volumes of books on this stuff. And this is, so you asked me a question, right? Like, how is it that even faithful people can come to these sorts of conclusions? So, like, people like you and I, in particular, are at danger, believe it or not, because you may reach a point where you're reading something by an occultist and you go, well, I don't see any contradiction there with what I believe. And then you go a little deeper. Oh, well, that makes sense. Oh, well, that makes sense too. And so, like, and it's so subtle, right? Especially over the last 400 years with these occultists, there is this intersection between Catholic theology, very strong, well catechized Catholic theology. Eliphas Levi, actually, the leading most influential occultist other than Crowley and Madame Blavatsky. Eliphas Levi, the guy who's responsible for the image we know today as Baphomet,
Hmm.
this guy was in a seminary to become a priest in France, in a Jesuit seminary in the 19th century. He was ordained to the diaconate, allegedly. I mean, this guy, and I mean, this is 19th century France. I mean, obviously things weren't ideal then, but they were far well more educated in seminaries then than they are by and large today,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so, I mean, and you go read some of this guy's stuff, like what I mentioned to you last night, you asked about, and I found the source for that actually as well. And I can provide that for you
Sure.
later. But you read this quote and you go like, this literally sounds like somebody who converted back to Catholicism.
Hmm.
And if it wasn't for just a couple key words he uses, and for me knowing what I know about what he's saying, then somebody could read that and go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense."
Wow.
So like there's this huge intersection, and so they have these secret societies over these centuries and centuries where they hide and they mix the symbols so well, and they're so well educated on how to do it that it becomes confusing. And now it's getting to a point where they don't even have to do that anymore. They can just put like the upside down pentagram on beer bottles and people will drink right out of it. And God knows what they're doing in the brewery with that.
Yeah.
There was a story I read a couple I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, and I don't remember where it occurred. I'll have to find it again and send it to you. But they actually, a brewery held, or they hosted rather, the Satanic Temple, and they performed a black mass, and they alleged that they had an actual consecrated host, and it happened at a brewery. Like,
Oh.
what sort of like investor does the brewery have in this? You know what I mean? Like, why are they doing that at where they make beer? So God knows what they're doing
Hmm.
to the beer, if they're doing that inside the brewery. Any brewery that had that done and beer's made in it, I wouldn't drink that liquid. Like I just
Oh yeah.
wouldn't do it, you know?
And that fits with I would, yeah, like to learn more about that story and what that brewery was too. But with more and more priests are adamant about blessing everything before you drink it, eat it, whatever it is, even a cup of coffee, a glass of beer, a piece of candy,
Yeah.
because the world, and I mean, we see it, it's not a conspiracy theory about the rise of the occult. This is an
No.
objective reality. Sensible people, International Association of Exorcists, exorcists in our country, Monsignor Rossetti recently, I think it was like 2 months ago, said that exorcists in some parts of the country are overwhelmed by the number of people fleeing the occult, seeking them out, and that they can't help them. The exorcists, there aren't enough exorcists to help them. And then we look at all the symbolism, like everything we're talking about today. This is an objective reality that the occult is no longer afraid, is no longer hiding. Satanists are out in the public. They have after-school Satan clubs at schools. So I guess some people are like, okay, well, the average faithful we were just talking about might say, well, I don't see the damage, I don't see the fear, I don't see the worry. Like,
Yeah.
what is one way to show? I guess that's the question we need to answer. Is like, where is this going? Like, what should we be looking for next? What is and we might not know the answer, but what is the objective of the occult? Not just the devil, but yeah, what are they trying to do? Like, there's one. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the seminary link I sent you, but
I did briefly look at it, which is disturbing to say the least.
yeah.
I think that's that kind of thing is so I would say that the subject matter is dangerous, obviously, right? Like necromancy is just straight up dangerous. Like if there's one type of magic other than Satanism you don't want to get involved in, you don't want to get involved with any of this stuff, but God forbid you get involved with necromancy, summoning the dead, trying to raise corpses from graves. Like that's the kind of stuff that necromancers have done in the past. That's the stuff they try to do. Literally, there have been people who robbed graves trying to do this stuff. Like this is dark, dark stuff that you don't want to get involved with. I would say that seminary is probably, like the lady who ran it and started it probably began it as a way to like not only spread her system. It seems like she created her own system and is disseminating that amongst her quote unquote students or acolytes or whatever they call themselves. But from my opinion, it's a scam, and the scam is, it's like selling somebody a gun that that hasn't been test fired properly by its manufacturer. What happens when you bring that gun to the range and then pull the trigger? It could blow up in your hands and kill you or maim you. And that's precisely what she's doing, is she's scamming the people who are going to this place, first of all, by getting money from them. And second of all, she's handing them loaded weapons and going like, oh yeah, this thing's totally safe. You could point it at yourself and be fine. That's my interpretation of it. It's dangerous and it's a scam. Don't listen to people like that. Please don't
Yeah.
go to occult seminaries. Oh my goodness. So messed up.
Yeah, because there's no altruism. So
No,
there's gonna be a danger not just in the material but also in the motivation. And someone
it
point.
blows my, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean
Oh,
to
sorry.
interrupt you.
You
I was
mentioned
just saying that it blows my mind that there's so much free material for these people too.
mm,
If you're on the occult, if you're involved with the occult or interested in it, you can literally Google basically every writing by every influential occultist and read it for free on the internet. So why are you paying somebody to teach you this stuff? What is going on in your mind? Like, not only do you have this diabolical obsession, but you're irresponsible too. So those two things mixed together are not going to
mm.
turn out good for you.
And you just reminded me of a part of your story that you went from being like post Pentecostal to atheist, and then as a
Yes.
result of atheist, um, while an atheist, I should say, as a result of being curious and the internet having all of the occult information right there, that's what kind of lured you in. Is that
Oh
right?
yeah, definitely. Most definitely. I mean, there's so much of it out there too. And like I said previously, a lot of the stuff is written by, at least the legitimate stuff, like the really very insidious stuff, which all of it is, but I mean the subtly insidious things, the drop of poison in the bucket of
Mm-hmm.
water. A lot of that stuff is written by very well educated people who are very charismatic, very convincing, and they can trick probably darn near anybody into agreeing with at least a portion of what they believe. And that's what you have access to. You can pull it up on your phone.
Yeah.
Just Google Thelema Encyclopedia and start reading all the articles. And maybe for somebody like an exorcist or yourself, maybe that's necessary for their research or their work.
Mm,
I would still precaution, and
right.
obviously the use of sacramentals and things like that. I mentioned this too. Like Saint Augustine said that he basically, I don't think he believed in witchcraft. I think he believed it was just a trick of the devil's, which is kind of where I'm at, right? Is we shouldn't
Mhm.
fear this stuff necessarily, but we should fear its popularity.
Mm,
That's where I'm at. Like, this stuff, they can't touch you. Okay. As long as you pray, you go to confession, you receive the Eucharist, you do these things regularly.
mhm.
Pray every day. If you go to mass every day, even better. If you can go,
Right.
if you need to go to confession every day, that's kind of a problem. But then again, like, maybe you're committing venial sins and not mortal sins, and you just want to confess those and get graces from confessing those, and that's totally viable as well. So I mean, if you can receive the sacraments daily or frequently and pray every day, especially the rosary, and the St. Michael prayer. There's no reason you can't add that at the end of the rosary. It takes you 30 seconds to pray that prayer, quite
Mhm.
literally. You can say, but you don't even have to do any of that. I mean, every witch in the world could try to curse you and I right now. And as long as we're in the state of grace and we pray one Hail Mary faithfully, where we
Mhm.
believe in that, in its power, even just a little bit, right? Our faith just has to be the size of a mustard seed, according to our Lord.
Mhm.
If you just do that, every curse in the world cannot touch you. They can't, because Our Lady will not let it. It won't let it happen. That she won't let it happen. It's not going to affect you. So I think St. Augustine's right in that regard, right? So we should have no fear of witchcraft, especially if we're faithful in the state of grace. But unfortunately, the reality is with and this is going to be a very controversial statement, that with the mass apostasy currently occurring in
Mhm.
Holy Mother Church, a lot of people are in danger, okay, because they're not in the state of grace and they might think they are, and they're going to
Mm,
confession even though they might not accept the church's teaching on the Eucharist, and they're committing sacrilege by doing so. And then they go after confession to receive the Eucharist that they don't believe in and commit another sacrilege, and they're doing it every week, or maybe they're even doing it every day. And what we know about, not only what St. Paul says about that, about receiving the Eucharist without the proper disposition and proper belief to do so, we know directly from the Gospels themselves that when the first sacrilegious communion was Judas Iscariot, and the
mhm.
very next thing that happened according to the scripture is the devil entered him. That is what he was possessed by Satan when that happened. So, and this is a very scary notion.
And that would fit. Father Ripperger said that they all still say that possession's rare, but diabolical
Yeah,
influence, even possession is on the rise, but influence, like he would say 25% of the United States population is diabolically obsessed.
I
So
wouldn't
you,
doubt that.
and
That might even be a conservative estimate.
I think he probably was trying to be conservative just so people,
Weren't alarmed to go like, oh, that's some crackpot theory right there.
but
I'm not scared of
diabolical.
that. I have no credibility to worry about. So
That's right. Diabolical oppression has been said, like, what was it? I think it was Monsignor Rossetti again a while back, and a lot of people picked up on this, and I did as well, that he said the country was under a state of diabolical oppression, if not the whole world. So this is,
yeah,
again, not a conspiracy theory. A lot of thoughtful, prominent, devout members of the church and the hierarchy and exorcists see that the diabolical is out of control. And there are a lot of factors like what you were just mentioning. The whole, if you look at the statistics of who believes what in the church, who call themselves Catholics, and
yeah,
what they believe, and then what they do, receiving communion when they don't believe the teachings of the church. And there's so many attacks, like with same-sex marriage, for example. Like people buy into that. Well, that's essentially heretical, if not worse. It offends the faith on so many levels. If you accept that, well, you should not be receiving Holy Communion,
yeah,
and that's a widespread thing. One of the issues, images you made, it was right before you talked about St. Augustine. Something that's been on my mind for further research is that the devil himself is extremely intelligent. Like if you look at him, as of course
yes,
he's real, but what he did is a parallel to what's happening now. What he's extremely intelligent, very charismatic. This is some of the language you were using. Convinced a third of the angelic spirits to rebel, like, and state like a permanent rebellion, fell to the earth, and convinced Adam and Eve, the first two human beings, to fall as well.
yeah.
And is
While they were in a
convinced,
perfect state of grace and
yeah,
knowledge.
yeah, paradise, all the preternatural gifts, God's presence right there, and still like, So, and Eve's one of her main flaws was she entertained the devil's idea.
Yeah,
So, and that's what you're pointing to, how the faithful can be lured away. Like we're not that smart. We're not as smart as we would
no,
like to be. We're not as crafty, as intelligent. We don't have clarity of mind yet, not until we see the beatific vision. So we can be led astray if we get too proud or
yes,
not careful, too curious. The one exorcist I was listening to his talk, and he was just condemning curiosity wholesale. Curiosity is not a virtue. He
yeah,
was
no,
saying
it's not good. It's a
it
bad
can.
thing.
So, and I was like, that makes perfect sense, especially the way he mentioned it. So if we're living in a culture where so many people are not in a state of grace, so many Catholics are not in a state of grace, and that's a big deal. And the society is overwhelmed by occultic imagery and occultic philosophies. Just look at what's going on in the whole world right now. It's just this
Yeah,
demon of fear is taken over. Like this is we are in a situation where exorcists should be saying, we're overwhelmed, we can't help all the people coming to us from the occult. Like that makes sense that exorcist has that experience, because that's what's happening to the world.
yeah,
So I think testimonies like yours of people who were in the occult and left is vital, just like the testimonies of exorcists right now is vital, because they see what demons are doing and they know the solutions, and they've seen the power of these solutions.